Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us today on another of our drop-in sessions. Today's going to be a bit of a refresher, so I know I can see some new faces in the session here. So today's session, the focus is going to be walking through an approach that we've used hundreds of times in workshop sessions at Skore, and that is to help develop a detailed process end to end. That approach being the 5 steps to the perfect process. Before we do, however, for context, I'm going to provide a bit of a brief background of the Skore methodology and some of the basic building blocks we use to develop our processes. And I think this will help to ensure we're all on the same page, and the 5 steps will make much more sense when we go through them. So I'm just going to drill down into this first activity here. And the approach I'm going to show you today, it's all about making it as easy as possible to engage with people across the organisation within the umbrella of process improvement. And the way that we make it easy for you to engage with everybody in the organisation is simplicity. And Skore's a really powerful tool for understanding complex systems and processes. And this is largely down to the methodology that Skore takes to developing the processes. So for those unaware, the methodology or approach we use is based on universal process notation, also commonly known as UPN. And in simple terms, UPN is a very simple process notation that's easy to use and follow for the widest possible audience within any given organisation. Now, onto the second point here, in that UPN has quite a rich history, and it was developed from an approach called IDEF0 that was used by the US Air Force in the 1970s and 80s. We ran, one of my colleagues actually ran a session on IDEF0 and UPN, and so be sure to check that out on YouTube. It goes into much more depth than I will now, but essentially UPN was created to service the need to understand complexity at a human level in the context of operating jet aircraft. So especially in the 80s, when you think about jet aircraft, you've got humans and you're starting to introduce complex systems at the same time. And what was needed was to try and understand how all these different complex systems work together. And that's where IDEF0 came in. So for those familiar with IDEF0, you'll see some familiarity in Skore, in that we take a very similar approach, but it's simplified much further to make it suitable for business units. And one of the really powerful things about it is that by making the approach much simpler and building an intuitive user interface that we have in Skore, it allows us to develop processes in live collaborative workshops. Because what we're trying to do is remove some of the barriers from the thought process of developing processes. So when you're asking people about the process and how it works, you'll start to see the stream of consciousness. Some of you probably experienced this on the call, and it's especially when they're really trying to engage with the approach. And so what we wanted to do was make it as easy as possible to capture this stream of consciousness while it's coming out in a visual way, which is a really powerful thing to do. And ultimately, it's all about getting that common understanding within the organisation. So whether you're doing this approach in the room and then you're later sharing the process with a wider audience, the aim is always to capture it in such a way that anybody viewing the process that perhaps wasn't in the room could instantly understand it just from reading it. And I'll draw your attention to the last point on this slide, and it's a really interesting one, in that when done well, the approach shifts your relationship somewhat with the stakeholders. So it turns you from somebody whose job it is to gather and draw information from people into somebody who's having a collective conversation about what's happening. And the approach, it really helps stakeholders apply critical thinking to their own processes. And you'll start to find stakeholders challenging themselves about why they do certain things in the organisation. So that concludes the background. What I'm going to do now is going to give a really brief explanation in terms of the basic building blocks. So I drill down to this one here. So as I mentioned before, simplicity is the key, and these are the only 2 shapes that you'll need to describe a process in Skore, regardless of its complexity. So when mapping a process, your job as a facilitator is to essentially ask a number of questions to understand how the process works. Those questions being, why is it done? Who does it? How it's done? And what tools are used? And you'll find that these objects are essentially designed to collate all of that information in one place. So the what box, which is the rectangular box you see in the center of the screen here with the questions what and who, That's the what box is the key component in describing a process in Skore. It describes what happens in the process or the key steps. And when you're completing a what box, you should describe it as an activity. So we're using the verb noun construct. So that's the Y box in the center there. And then you'll see tacked onto the end is a what we call a Y box. And by contrast, the Y box is generally not used to describe activities. It's instead used to describe inputs or outputs from the key steps of the what boxes. So these Y boxes here generally appear either side of an activity to form an input, activity, outcome type approach. And the Y box really helps you to understand perhaps when the activity is complete, maybe what's being handed over to the next activity, or what the outcome is of that particular activity. So going back to the what box, there's a couple of different aspects to the what box that isn't just describing the activity. We've got the ability to attribute a who or a role. So it's here we can start to attribute human roles or perhaps systems that are used to execute the activity. So we capture those on the lower half there. If we have a responsibilities model, we can also apply a responsibilities model such as RACI to this element of the box as well. But if I draw your attention to the how, so in UPN terms, we talk about how is a process executed. And what we call this button here is the detailed view button. And what that allows you to do is essentially break down this activity into a lower level detail, or a sub-process might be a more familiar term to you. So we can essentially deconstruct what this activity looks like and start to develop how we're executing that activity to get to the agreed outcome. So again, that's something we'll look at as part of the 5 steps to the perfect process. And then you'll also see there's a paperclip icon that appears on the right. The paperclip icon appears on every single activity box. Similarly does the detailed view, and it's here we can capture, again in UPN terms, they ask the question with what, and it's here we start to capture additional information. So that might be a more detailed description of the activity, a link to a procedure, policy, system or website, images, videos, or if you want to get clever, perhaps some custom information for analysis, that being risks, issues, requirements, decision points, whatever it might be. So that's the basic building blocks. I go back up a level. So we're ready to get mapping. I'm going to drill down into the 5 steps of the perfect process so we can start to break down what those 5 steps look like. So if we're all in agreement that our step 1 is an undocumented process and we're all trying to get to a documented process or a well-defined, perhaps not a perfect process, because as Chris on the call will tell you, there's no such thing as a perfect process, but we can get pretty damn near it. So the first step is title and scope. So this is the first activity we do when we create a process, is to input a title, and that helps us. That's our sort of first scoping activity to get a focus for the session. And then the second activity we do is to develop the main inputs and outputs for the process. So where does the process start and end? In step 2, we start to look at the activities. So this is the work that happens in this process. Remembering those activities are captured in the what boxes. And again, we're using verb and noun construct to describe those activities. Then once we have an agreed set of activities on the screen, we start to look at the outputs. So again, we start to ask those questions. Why do you do that? What's the deliverable? What's the tangible outcome? Can we measure something? And it's in those Y boxes that we start to form our outcomes and alike. Then we're on to step 4, which is flow and who does it. So at this point, we start to join the process up to get a recognised or an agreed consensus as to which activities follow which activity. So we're joining the activities up in the correct order, and then we're also having a bit of a discussion in terms of which role or which roles work on the activity to execute the activity. Then once we have an end-to-end process, we can start to capture the what else. So this could be capturing supporting information, this could be drilling down to develop sub-processes or lower levels of detail, or it could be simply embellishing and tidying up the process to make it more visually pleasing. So those are the 5 steps. And what I'm going to do is we'll just go through an example process together to demonstrate in sort of a workshop style how we start to develop, or we'll work through these 5 steps. So I'm just going to reutilize this canvas, so we have the 5 steps at the top there. So if we take title and scope, again, I'm going to use the example of an employee expense process. So I'm going to create a notebox to begin with, and I'm going to type in the title. Now, if you've got a diagram template set up for your workspace, purely by creating a new process card, your title is going to be pre-populated on the screen. So I'm just doing this manually for now. And for those not already aware, I'm using Skore Spinnaker. So this is the next release. So anybody that's not familiar with the UI that you're looking at here, I'm using the sort of the latest version of Skore. And within the latest version, I've got a text editor, so I can just start to create some headings there. So all I'm doing here is I'm just creating a title for the process. So we've got employee expense. We've got employee expense process as a title. That's my first scoping activity. My second scoping activity is to agree where does the process start or end. So to do that, I can drag a Y box onto the screen. So on the left-hand side, you'll see we've got the editing panel, and those 2 familiar boxes, the what box and the Y box, are there. So I can drag a Y box onto the screen and click away, and it will form the Y box there. Double click to enter, and I can start to enter what the input of the process, what triggers the process of an employee expense. Now at this point, I'd hand it over to the floor, but we're in a drop-in here, so I'll dictate what the input is today. So it's going to be expense incurred. Okay, and I'll apologise for my spelling in advance. So we've got an input, recognised input, we've got an expense has been incurred, and then we want to get to the point where perhaps the claim is approved for payment. So again, I can drag and drop a Y box onto the screen, or I can use a keyboard shortcut. So you'll see that they appear on the bottom of the canvas here, and the Skore will try and dynamically display the shortcut it thinks is going to be relevant to you depending on what you're doing in the software. So it thinks we're in process creation mode here, so it's showing us the short codes for creating objects. So you'll see that I can hit Y on my keyboard and I left click with my mouse, and that's going to create me a Y box. I'm putting it to the right of the canvas as my outcome, and I'm going to say it's a claim approved for payment. I can click away and I'll drag that to the right of the screen. Now your scope might change throughout the session, and that's more than okay. It's just a case of editing that scope. But what we find is it being the first step is, and one of the most important step, is that it helps to focus everybody in the room. So we don't start talking about perhaps finance processes or HR processes. We really are focused in terms of developing the process from getting from point A all the way through to point B. So now we've agreed our title and scope, we can move on to the activities. And the first thing we do is to start to drag on a number of what boxes. Now that number is up to you. I think at Skore we have sort of differing ideas as to how many what boxes should be on a screen, but my personal rule is about 6 to 10. I try not to deviate away from that. But in the purposes of today's session, we'll keep it simple, and I'll keep it to just 3 activities. And at this point, we can start to ask people in the subject matter experts in the session, what are the activities we need to do or are part of this process that helps us get from an expense incurred through to a claim that's approved for payment. And what you'll find is that there will be 2 types of people in the room. There will be people that like to start really high level, and they talk to you about the high level activities that occur in the process. And there are perhaps others that like to drag you down into the detail and start to talk about the individual steps that are executed in a system. And both of those approaches are fine. In that case, my advice would be, if you have that sort of scenario, is to try and capture as much as you can. And you can do that by throwing some more what boxes onto the screen. Perhaps if they're lower level, you might want to group them together, that you can later agree what the high level activity is, and then drag it down into a sub process. Or you might use a note box. So again, I'm using the shortcut codes here. So that's an N and a click to get a note box. and we could start to just capture some notes in there if we don't want to capture them as activities. That's just a bit of a tip. In terms of the activities in the expenses process, somebody's got to submit the expense claim. So again, keeping to that verb noun construct, I'm going to use the word submit expense claim, and I'll click away. And then at some point, somebody's got to log that individual expense. So again, I'm going to use the word log individual expense. And then because we've got the outcome here is a claim approved for payment, that's a clue to suggest that there's an approval activity in this process. So at some point, somebody's going to have to review and approve the claim. Okay. So once we've agreed the number of activities or have developed a number of activities on the high level here, it's at this point we can move on to step 3. So these are the outputs or the outcomes. So again, we're asking questions: why do you do this? What's the deliverable? Is there something we can measure for doing this activity? What's the value to completing this activity? So if we're looking at submitting the expense claim as an example, we tend to avoid trying to use the past tense because it doesn't really give us too much more information and it just takes up a bit more real estate on the page. So instead of saying expense claim submitted, what can we develop as an outcome that is that's giving us more value or giving us some more information, helping the end user read this process and get something from it? Well, we can say that perhaps the claim is sent to the line manager. So as part of the submitting the expense claim, the claim is sent to line manager. And you'll notice to create that Y box, all I've done is hover over the activity box here, and you'll see that there are a number of what we call anchor points or connector points. And when I hover over one, it will turn green. I can then select with my left cursor to drag it away from the box, and then I'll just click away, and that will give me a connected Y box. So logging the individual expense. Again, a good outcome might be that we can say that the expense item is saved. And if we want to know how that expense item is saved, that's the sort of information that we have perhaps put in the lower level of detail when we start to break down this activity. So expense item saved. If we move on to reviewing and approving the claim, I can already see one outcome here. So again, I'm just using the anchor points to connect up to each anchor point, and as soon as it goes green, I know that I can let go, and that's connected. So that's a connection there. Now, because it's a review and approve activity, there's going to be a couple of outcomes. Either you're going to have an approval, like we've just created the association with, or we're going to have a rejection. So to capture two outcomes to an activity, we simply generate two Y boxes. So again, I can use the keyboard shortcut to create a Y box. I can use the anchor points to drag out and create a Y box. Or a third way to create another object is to select the object. I know it's selected because it's gone purple, and I can hit space, and space will generate me a new box. And every time I hit space, it's going to create me a new object in the construct of that methodology I spoke about at the beginning, that input activity outcome construct. You can get quite fast at this, so you can hit Shift and Tab will move you back through the process, or hitting Tab will move you forward. Enter on the keyboard will allow you to enter information. Again, tabbing will allow me to go and move out through all the different options within the activity box, and then hitting Enter takes me out again, and I can hit Tab to go on to the next piece there. I think we've done a session on mapping at the speed of conversation, so another chance to plug another session we've run, which you'll find on the YouTube channel. So we're going to create another object here, and that was to capture a rejection. So I'm going to say that we have rejected expense items, and that's a secondary outcome there. Now, once we're happy with the first step and we've developed the outputs, we then go on to the flow and who does it. So we're going to really quickly move these objects around to get them into the right order. So I think we could all be in agreement that this is the last activity because this takes us to our outcome. But perhaps we log to submit an expense claim, perhaps we log the individual expense first. So to select each of these activities, to select these objects, I can hit Shift on my keyboard and then a left click with my cursor, and that gives me this little blue selector box. I can drag that selector box over any number of objects, and I just need to touch them and click away, and that will select both of those objects there. And what that allows me to do is then move them together around the process. So I can do that with submit the expense claim. I can move that there, and then I can move this one up slightly. And then it's just a case of using those anchor points to quite quickly connect all those boxes together. I appreciate it's not looking the tidiest. At the end, I'll show you how to tidy all this up. But now it's the time to do the who does it. So again, you'll notice that the software is prompting me or prompting the people in the session. When we talk about that critical thinking, it's really trying to help people in the session to engage and give you the answers before you need to ask them. So you'll find people are shouting out who does these activities before you need to ask. So who needs to log the individual expense? Well, it's probably going to be the employee. So I can type in the search box, and if I've already created that role somewhere else in my workspace, it's going to give me an option to select that role. Just helps prevent duplication and make sure that we're selecting or naming the role in the right way. If I hadn't created the employee, it's a case of just hitting that create button there. But I've got employees, so I can assign them. If we are assigning a responsibility, I can hit a responsibility and click away. Submitting the expense claim, again, that's probably going to be the employee, so I can select the employee there. Now, new to Spinnaker is the concept of systems and a system manager. So we now treat human roles and systems as slightly different. So if I am attributing a system, let's say to keep it easy, we're gonna submit the expense on Excel, and I can click away, and you can see now it's created an additional compartment on my box, and the style sheet dictates that it's a slightly different color. So we've captured a system there. And then reviewing and approving the claim, let's call it the line manager, because that's who it's being handed over to. So quite quickly, I've developed an end-to-end process using that construct. Quite quickly. So the last thing, or the penultimate thing I want to show you is the detailed view concept. So if we take log the individual expense as an example. When I hover over the activity, you'll see that there's these two icons we spoke about before. When I hit the detailed view button, it gives me the option to go and create a detailed view. So if I hit that button here, what we've done is, and you'll see on the crumb trail, we've gone from 5 steps to the perfect process high level into logging the individual expense. So the software's created that association, and we've drilled down into the lower level of detail. And now the software is going to help us kick off the 5 steps all over again, and we can start to redefine our scope by dragging and dropping the inputs and the outputs onto the screen. So the software knows that at the top level, log the individual expense has an input of expense incurred, and it has an outcome of expense item saved. Now again, we can use a keyboard shortcut, I and a click for input, and O and a click for outcome if we wanted to get speedy at it. And then we start our 5 steps all over again. We develop our number of what boxes, we develop the outcomes that sit against each of those what boxes, develop the flow, develop the who does it, and then we start to embellish the process with more and more information. So the last thing I'll show you is tidying up the process, and it's really quite simple. We can either select a whole manner of objects that we want to align, and I can go to the arrange panel that appears in the top left here and click a number of buttons here, but you'll also see that there are a number of shortcut keys that it's telling me here. So I want to align all these objects to the top, so it's telling me I can hit T. So if I select all these objects and hit T, it's going to align everything to the top, and the behavior here is that it's going to align everything to the highest object that I've selected. If I wanted to, and I'll just go Oh, sorry, my computer's frozen a little bit there. So if I select these objects here, sorry, and I want to actually align to this object here rather than the highest object, I can select an object as an anchor point. Oh, I'm going to select this as an anchor point and then hit T, and it's going to bring everything down to that level. Similarly, a H for horizontal will horizontally align everything in that way. Excellent. So that I've spent a bit longer on that than anticipated. So more than happy to stick around for a bit longer than 4:30 if anybody's got any questions. But yes, I'll open up to any questions, any thoughts.